Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following narrative is created for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is inspired by publicly discussed themes and allegations. The air in the courtroom was already heavy, thick with anticipation. Each breath a collective held silence. For weeks, the city had been gripped by the unfolding drama, a spectacle of power, celebrity, and whispered darkness. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared anyone for the moment that was about to unfold. It began with a subtle shift, a ripple of movement near the judge's bench. Then, the bailiff, a figure usually receding into the background, stepped forward. His voice, amplified by the courtroom's acoustics, cut through the tension like a blade, echoing across the chamber. A drumroll no one had expected, certainly not one meant to usher in a witness. Jennifer Lopez, please approach the stand. A collective gasp, audible and visceral, ripped through the room, spreading like a shockwave. Outside the grand old building, the frantic clicking of camera shutters erupted in a frenzied assault on the quiet morning. Inside, reporters, usually stoic and composed, dropped their pens, their notepads suddenly irrelevant. Whispers, urgent and disbelieving, erupted in the gallery, spreading like wildfire from one row to the next. The air, already charged, turned electric, buzzing with an unspoken energy. Even the most seasoned members of the jury, typically impassive, leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, waiting. And then she appeared. Jennifer Lopez. She didn't enter from the main doors, but emerged from a private side entrance, a stark contrast to the public spectacle outside. She was escorted, not by an entourage, but by two federal marshals, their presence a silent, grave testament to the significance of her appearance. Dressed in a charcoal gray suit, tailored with quiet precision, she exuded a reserved dignity. Her face, usually a canvas of vibrant expression, was shielded by dark, oversized sunglasses, which she removed only when she was finally seated in the witness box. She didn't speak. She didn't offer a polite nod or a casual wave. She didn't smile, not even a faint, nervous flicker. She simply walked with an almost unnatural precision, her posture ramrod straight, her gaze fixed straight ahead. It was as if she were carrying the weight of decades' worth of secrets, a heavy, invisible burden she had borne for far too long. The room, which moments ago had been a cacophony of hushed anticipation, fell into a complete, absolute silence. The only sound was the soft click of her heels on the polished floor, a deliberate rhythmic beat in the otherwise breathless hush. The judge's voice was the first to break the profound stillness, calm but firm, a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. Miss Lopez, thank you for appearing under subpoena. You've been called to testify due to your documented history and close personal relationship with Mr. Combs, particularly concerning events occurring between 1999 and 2003. Do you understand the scope of your testimony? Her answer was almost inaudible, a quiet, fragile whisper that seemed to absorb the entire room's sound. I do. Her voice, so familiar from stadiums and silver screens, was now barely a breath, a stark whisper in comparison to the room's former chaos. And as she spoke, all eyes, every single gaze in the courtroom, shifted. They landed on Diddy. For the first time during what had already been a grueling, highly public trial, he looked visibly nervous. His usual swagger, his impenetrable confidence, had cracked. His fingers, usually still, now tapped rapidly, a nervous tick against the polished surface of the defense table. His lips were pressed tightly together, a thin, almost bloodless line. He didn't meet her gaze. He couldn't. The prosecutor, a sharp, unyielding figure, stepped forward, her voice clear and precise. Miss Lopez, you were present during the December 1999 incident involving a nightclub shooting in New York City alongside Mr. Combs. Is that correct? Jennifer paused, a beat of hesitation that felt like an eternity. The room was dead silent, hanging on her every breath. Yes. You were detained by NYPD but released without charges. Do you recall what Mr. Combs said to you during the drive away from the scene? She hesitated again, her gaze unfocused for a moment, as if she were mentally replaying a long-buried memory. The air in the room was so thick, so completely silent, you could almost hear the collective breath holding. Then, she spoke, her voice still quiet, but with a newfound, steely resolve. He told me not to speak to anyone, that his people would make it go away. The prosecutor didn't flinch, didn't show a hint of surprise. This was clearly information she already possessed, a calculated step in a much larger strategy. She held up a file, a thin, manila folder, for Jennifer to see. "Do you recognize this?" Jennifer looked down at the file, her gaze lingering on it for a moment, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She nodded slowly. "That's the statement I gave to the police. But it's missing pages." "Exactly," the prosecutor said, her voice like a hammer striking an anvil, precise and impactful. "Pages that were sealed by private legal counsel and allegedly edited at Mr. Combs's request before the file was finalized." Diddy's attorney, a man who had been a whirlwind of objections and protests throughout the trial, immediately shot to his feet. "Objection, speculation, unsubstantiated, overruled," the judge replied sharply, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Proceed." The prosecutor turned back to Jennifer, her intensity unwavering. "Ms. Lopez, do you recall attending an event at Mr. Combs's Miami mansion in the summer of 2001? Jennifer blinked, a small, involuntary movement, as if trying to control her expression, to keep a lifetime of curated composure from crumbling. "Yes." "Were there cameras allowed inside that night?" "No," Jennifer replied, her voice gaining a little more strength now, a quiet determination. "Phones were taken at the gate." "And what were guests told was the purpose of this event?" "They were told it was a spiritual and creative renewal experience." Her voice held a hint of dry, bitter irony. "And was that accurate?" Jennifer swallowed, a visible effort. Her gaze hardened. "No. Please elaborate." "It was something else," she began, the words carefully chosen, each one weighted with untold experience. "There were rooms I wasn't allowed in, people I didn't recognize. Music played all night, but not the kind you dance to. Felt staged, controlled. Like a performance, but not for us." "Did Mr. Combs ever ask you to stay silent about what you saw there?" She nodded, a single, resolute movement. "Yes. He said if I loved my career, I'd keep those memories private." The room stirred again, a new wave of murmurs rippling through the gallery. The jury shifted in their seats, a collective ripple of unease moving across the benches. This wasn't the glamorous Jennifer Lopez the world knew, the vibrant superstar from Super Bowl stages or red carpets. This was a woman stripped bare years later, trying to unload the crushing burden of what she had carried silently for far too long. "And did you?" the prosecutor asked, her voice soft now, almost a rhetorical question. Jennifer looked directly at Diddy, a gaze so piercing it seemed to bore into him, though he still refused to meet her eyes. "Did I what?" "Keep it private." Her voice resonated with a quiet, devastating power. "Yes, for 24 years. The weight of that number hung in the air, a physical presence, like a storm cloud gathering directly above Diddy's head. He finally, subtly, closed his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, a ghost of a wince. The courtroom sat in breathless, profound silence, now fully, acutely aware that the glittering chapters of Jennifer Lopez's early career were not just accompanied by spotlight and success, by dazzling achievements and global fame. They were accompanied by shadows, deep, pervasive shadows. Shadows tied directly to the man now fighting for his future. Shadows she had been asked, commanded, to forget. Until now, the courtroom remained utterly still, the gravity of Jennifer Lopez's words clinging to every inch of the air, to every person present. For a woman known for commanding stadiums, for dazzling millions on screen with her boundless energy and charisma, her voice today was subdued, deliberate, almost fragile. But that fragility held a force, a quiet strength that the entire courtroom could feel, could almost taste. She wasn't there to perform, to finally, irrevocably, Speak her truth. The prosecutor approached again, a small, unassuming red evidence folder in her hand. Miss Lopez, I'd like to revisit the night of January 14th, 2000, less than a month after the nightclub shooting. You and Mr. Combs were photographed entering a private after-party in Beverly Hills. Do you recall that evening? Jennifer nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful, as if sifting through layers of memory. Yes, she began, her voice gaining a touch more clarity. He told me it was a celebration for getting past the worst of it. I didn't really want to go, but he insisted. Did anything stand out about that night? She paused, choosing her words with painstaking care, her gaze distant, as if viewing the scene in her mind. Everything. It wasn't a party. It was an audition. A ripple of confusion, audible and immediate, spread through the room. Audition? The prosecutor repeated, her tone reflecting the room's bewilderment. Yes, Jennifer said, her voice firm now, decisive. He paraded people in front of a select group of guests. Models, young artists, aspiring industry hopefuls. People with NDAs thicker than the Bible. Everyone there knew they were being watched. And chosen. Chosen for what? I don't know, she admitted, a note of lingering unease in her voice. But it didn't feel right. Felt transactional, controlled, cold. Like a meat market for ambition. The prosecutor moved to a presentation screen, placing a printed email chain onto the overhead projector. The text was stark, white against black. This correspondence was recovered from a forensic image of a laptop confiscated from a former employee of Mr. Combs. In it, your name appears next to a list of VIP attendees and a note. J knows. Reinforce the pact. Reassure her this is her launchpad. She turned back to Jennifer. Do you recall being told something like that? Jennifer's face stiffened, a flicker of pain in her eyes. Yes, he said this was how the industry worked, that sometimes success required a little compromise. That I had talent, but talent wasn't what made stars. Allegiance did. And what did that mean to you? It meant shut up and don't ask questions. The words were delivered with a quiet fury, a deep-seated resentment finally given voice. From the gallery, a few murmurs broke through the courtroom's fragile silence before the judge. Without a word, simply raised his hand, commanding silence. Miss Lopez, the prosecutor said, her voice dropping, taking on a more empathetic tone. Did you ever fear Mr. Combs? Jennifer looked down, took a deep, shuddering breath, then slowly met the prosecutor's eyes. Her voice quivered slightly, but her gaze was resolute. Yes, not because he hurt me physically, not with his hands, but because I knew what he was capable of. The reach, the people who owed him, the people who feared him. I didn't want to disappear, so I stayed close, and I stayed quiet. You had a career to protect, the prosecutor offered, a subtle prompt. I had myself to protect, she corrected, her voice rising slightly, imbued with an almost desperate honesty. The courtroom wasn't just listening now. It was grieving. Grieving for the silence she kept, for the loyalty she had to fake, for the truth she could only now, after so long, begin to unpack. The prosecutor walked slowly to the jury box, her eyes scanning each face. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice resonating with conviction. Consider what Miss Lopez just said. This is a global superstar, a woman with everything. Fame, wealth, platforms. And yet she still feared what this man could do to her if she stepped out of line. What does that tell you about the others? The ones without platforms. The ones who didn't get to walk away. The ones who truly vanished. She turned back to Jennifer, her final question hanging in the air. Miss Lopez, one final question. Do you regret staying silent? Jennifer blinked slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, quickly wiped away. Her voice was a whisper again, but one filled with profound sorrow. Every single day, her gaze shifted, finding the jury's eyes, connecting with them, raw and honest. I watched people disappear, not literally vanish, no, but from rooms, from credits, from opportunities. I watched people get blacklisted, broken down, erased, and I knew if I said one wrong word, I'd be next. A long, profound pause. The quiet in the room was absolute. Then, her voice gained a new strength, a fierce determination. But I'm not afraid anymore. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, a solemn expression on his face. The court recognizes the emotional toll of this testimony. We'll adjourn for recess. As the gavel struck, a sharp, decisive sound, the silence afterward didn't fade. It lingered, heavy, lingering in the minds of jurors who were no longer seeing Jennifer Lopez, the icon. They were seeing Jennifer, the witness, Jennifer, the survivor. And across the aisle, Diddy sat hunched, a shadow of his former self, no longer the master of the room, because the past had finally caught up. And the woman he once counted on to stay silent had just become his undoing. The courtroom lights flickered back on as recess ended, but the atmosphere had only thickened, growing more potent, more charged. What once felt like just another celebrity testimony had transformed into something entirely more intimate, more revealing. Jennifer Lopez had cracked open a vault, one sealed for over 2 decades by fear and unspoken agreements. And now the prosecution wasn't just looking to expose Diddy. They were pulling back the curtain on an entire culture of silence, a hidden world of power and coercion. Jennifer returned to the witness stand with visible tension in her posture. Yet still, she stood firm. The glamour was gone, replaced by a raw, unvarnished honesty. She looked like a woman reliving a life she had fought hard to forget. But in her eyes, there was no regret, only resolve. The prosecutor stepped forward again, her hand now holding a small, unassuming USB drive. She approached the court clerk and inserted it into the presentation screen's port. The judge gave a quiet nod, his expression grim. "Miss Lopez," the prosecutor began, her voice low, measured. "You testified earlier about private events hosted by Mr. Combs during your relationship. This court has just obtained an audio file dated October 2002. Recorded from an external surveillance microphone that was never submitted into evidence until now. You were present at the event. Do you consent to this being played?" Jennifer inhaled deeply, a visible preparation for what was to come. "Yes." The screen lit up. The audio began with muffled chatter, the faint sounds of laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses, the ordinary sounds of a party. Then, a familiar voice cut through the noise, clear and chilling, unmistakable. Diddy's voice. "She's hesitant, but she'll come around. She knows what's at stake." A second, lower voice responded, indistinct but present. "You sure about J.Lo? Trust me." Diddy's voice continued, a chilling confidence in his tone. "I know how to handle her." Silence. Absolute, terrifying silence filled the courtroom. Jennifer's face drained of color, her jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Her hands, resting on the rail of the witness box, trembled almost imperceptibly. The prosecutor looked at her, her voice gentle. "Do you recognize that exchange?" "Yes," she said through a tight throat, the word barely audible. "That was the night I left the party early. I remember the pressure. He wanted me to introduce certain people to industry guests, people I didn't know, people who seemed out of place. I told him I felt uncomfortable. I was scolded for embarrassing him." The prosecutor nodded slowly. "And when you said no, what happened?" "I didn't get calls for 2 months," Jennifer explained, her voice gaining a haunting quality. "Not from film studios, not from labels. It was like I disappeared overnight." "You believe he blacklisted you?" "I know he did," she corrected, her voice resolute, fueled by past pain. "Because when I finally confronted him about it, he told me, 'Next time, remember who gave you your platform.'" A collective gasp rippled through the audience, a shared shock at the brazen admission. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, turning to the bench, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "We ask the court to take judicial notice of the pattern that's emerging here. This is not a story about one person's fall from grace. This is a coordinated, decades-long pattern of coercion, manipulation, and control involving one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. A system designed to silence and intimidate. She turned back to Jennifer, her next question weighty. Did Mr. Combs ever ask you to testify falsely on his behalf in the past? Jennifer hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. The room was absolutely silent, every single person waiting, breathless. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a monumental confession. Yes, she admitted. After the shooting incident in 1999, he asked me to say I saw nothing, that I was in the bathroom, that he had nothing to do with anything that night. Did you? I did, she confessed, her eyes downcast, filled with a deep regret, because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I was young, terrified, and I believed him. I believed he could make my career vanish. The prosecutor let the confession settle, allowing its full impact to sink into the jury and the gallery before continuing. Ms. Lopez, do you believe that fear has silenced others, too? Jennifer's eyes welled with tears, a raw, honest display of emotion. Absolutely. I've seen it. Dancers, assistants, stylists, creative partners. They just disappear after asking the wrong questions, after saying the wrong thing. No explanations, no goodbyes. They just vanish. The courtroom sat breathless, watching her, deeply affected. I was protected by fame, by my public image, but even that wasn't enough to speak up back then. Now I realize I wasn't silent because I wanted to be. I was silent because silence was the currency of survival in his world. Diddy sat motionless, his attorney whispering something frantically in his ear, but he didn't respond. His gaze was fixed, locked on the woman who once stood beside him on red carpets, under flashing lights, now testifying against him under oath, tearing down the empire he had built on a foundation of silence. The judge turned toward Jennifer, his expression grave. Miss Lopez, I commend your willingness to speak. This testimony will be weighed heavily. And with that, the gavel struck again, a sharp, final sound. But everyone knew it wasn't the end of her testimony. It was the beginning of Diddy's unraveling, because Jennifer Lopez had finally said what so many others couldn't. And now the walls were closing in. When the court resumed, the tension had mutated into something raw, something no longer merely legal. It was now deeply personal. Jennifer Lopez sat on the witness stand like a woman who had carried a storm within her for years, a tempest of secrets and fear finally allowed to rage. The cracks in her voice weren't weakness. They were wounds finally breathing, finally healing in the harsh light of truth. And the courtroom knew it. Everyone knew it. Even Diddy. The prosecution stepped forward once more, this time holding a stack of black and white photographs. They were old, faded, hinting at a hidden past. Ms. Lopez, the attorney began gently, her voice almost comforting. We have here a set of images obtained from a confidential source tied to a private investigator who was hired in the early 2000s to monitor high-profile celebrity parties. These were never made public, but your image appears in several of them. Do you recognize these? Jennifer took the photos, her hands trembling slightly as she studied each one. In one, she was seated on a plush leather couch beside Diddy, his arm possessively around her. In another, she was seen walking into a gated property in the Hollywood Hills, her face tense, her hand being held, not affectionately, but urgently, almost like a grip. She nodded slowly. Yes, that was the San Remo property. He had it rented under someone else's name. And what were the rules for that property? It was a no-phone zone. Everyone who entered had to sign NDAs. Did you know what the event was before you arrived? I was told it was a business dinner, but it wasn't. Her voice dropped, a chilling quietness entering her tone. What was it? Jennifer's voice was barely a whisper now, filled with a profound sense of dread that sent a shiver through the room. It was an initiation. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, a collective gasp of disbelief. Even the judge, usually impassive, raised his eyebrows, a flicker of surprise and concern on his face. An initiation into what? The prosecutor pressed, sensing the profound revelation. Into his inner circle, Jennifer explained, her eyes distant, as if reliving the unsettling experience. The ones who got access, protection, but it came at a cost. There were rooms in that house I wasn't allowed to go near. People were escorted in, then disappeared for hours. I saw things that made me deeply uncomfortable. A feeling of dread. Were drugs involved? Jennifer hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes. Were minors present? Jennifer's breath hitched. She paused, then heartbreakingly, she whispered, I don't know their ages, but some of them looked younger than they should have been. Far too young to be in that environment. A sharp, collective gasp exploded in the courtroom, a visceral reaction of horror and outrage. Even the judge visibly recoiled, his expression one of profound disturbance. Did you ever report what you saw? The prosecutor asked, her voice filled with a quiet urgency. Jennifer shook her head, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. To who? At the time, he was untouchable. He was backed by billionaires, by producers, by powerful executives. If I said anything, it would have been buried, and I would have gone with it. I would have been erased. The prosecutor moved closer, her voice firm, leading to the next devastating revelation. Miss Lopez, we have a voicemail recovered from your former publicist's cloud archive. It's dated April 2003. In it, Mr. Combs is heard threatening to release private videos if you chose to walk away from him. Tears, now unchecked, formed in Jennifer's eyes, tracing paths down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He left it after I told him I wanted to end all ties with him, professionally and personally. He told me he had footage from nights I didn't even remember being filmed. He said if I ever turned on him, if I ever spoke out, I'd lose everything. My career, my reputation, my life as I knew it. And did that threat influence your silence? It controlled me, she confessed, the raw honesty palpable. It kept me locked in fear. It dictated my every public move. The prosecutor looked to the judge, her gaze resolute. Permission to play the voicemail, Your Honor. The judge, his face a mask of solemnity, gave a grim nod. The audio filled the room, crackling with a faint static at first. Then Diddy's unmistakable voice, laced with menace and chilling calm. Don't forget who helped you build your brand. I've got hours of tape. Walk away if you want, but don't walk too far. I'll make sure everyone sees what the superstar really looks like when the cameras are off. The real you, the raw footage. A hush, like death itself, fell over the room. It was profound, absolute. Jennifer closed her eyes, her hands trembling slightly, but she didn't break. She didn't collapse. She just stood there, absorbing the assault of her past. The prosecutor turned back to her, her voice soft, but impactful. Why are you speaking now, Miss Lopez? After all this time? Because silence didn't save me, she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet, undeniable strength. It only extended the pain, prolonged the fear, and if there's even one person watching this trial who's still scared of him, still trapped by fear of powerful men like him, maybe hearing me say this gives them permission to stop being afraid, to find their own voice. Diddy, across the room, looked like a man unraveling from the inside out. His legal team sat frozen, utterly stunned. There were no objections, no whispered strategies, no frantic gestures. Just the stark, brutal reality that his past, once so neatly buried under platinum records and golden deals, had finally surfaced in full, unadulterated view. And it was ugly. It was devastating. The judge took a moment before speaking, his voice somber. This court will recess until tomorrow morning. Miss Lopez, you may step down. Your testimony will remain sealed from media until reviewed for further action. Jennifer rose. Her heels echoed across the marble floor as she walked past Diddy's table, each step a deliberate, resonant sound. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to, but he looked at her. Broken, small, the illusion of control stripped away like cheap wallpaper in a storm. And the courtroom knew it. This wasn't just a pop star's testimony. This was the sound of truth cracking through an empire built on silence. built on fear, built on manipulation. When the courtroom opened the next morning, the atmosphere was unlike anything seen before. Reporters had lined up before dawn, their faces etched with anticipation, their equipment ready for a historic moment. Security had been doubled, the air thick with palpable excitement and tension. Everyone, from seasoned legal experts to former collaborators of Diddy, knew what had fundamentally shifted. Jennifer Lopez's testimony hadn't just shocked the courtroom. It had sent tremors through the entertainment world, through boardrooms and studios, reverberating across the globe. And now everyone was waiting to see what would follow, what additional layers of truth would be revealed. The judge arrived promptly, his presence commanding, his gaze sweeping the packed room. This court is now in session. Jennifer Lopez was asked to return to the stand for a final session of cross-examination. She stepped forward with the same quiet composure that had defined her throughout, but something in her eyes had undeniably changed. Less fear, more fire, a quiet, burning resolve. Diddy's lead attorney, a formidable figure known for his aggressive tactics, stood and walked to the center of the room, attempting to regain control of a narrative that was rapidly slipping away. "Miss Lopez," he began carefully, his tone laced with a practiced skepticism. "You've described a great deal of emotional pressure, complicated relationships, and powerful figures. But wouldn't you agree that in the years since your separation from Mr. Combs, you've never filed a formal complaint against him?" Jennifer looked straight ahead, her gaze unwavering. "No, I didn't." "Why not?" he pressed, a hint of accusation in his voice. "Because the world didn't listen to women like me when I had less power," she explained, her voice strong and clear. "When I was younger, less established. And by the time I had enough of it, by the time I had built my own empire, I had been trained to stay silent. I had learned the currency of his world." He raised an eyebrow, attempting to corner her. "So you stayed silent out of self-interest?" "I stayed silent out of survival," she corrected, her voice cutting through the air like a razor, precise and undeniable. "There's a difference." The attorney paced slowly, a calculated movement. "Let me ask, during your time with Mr. Combs, did he ever force you to do anything illegal?" "No." "So, you're saying he never explicitly threatened you with physical harm?" "No," she said, her gaze steady, her voice unwavering. "Because he didn't have to." The courtroom fell quiet again. A new kind of silence, one of deep understanding. "Power doesn't always show up as violence," she continued, her voice resonating with painful wisdom. "Sometimes it's just a look, a reminder, a whisper in a hallway about what could be taken from you. When someone like him says, 'Be careful,' or 'Watch your step,' you don't wait to find out what that means. You just comply." The attorney looked visibly unsettled, his confident facade beginning to crack. He was losing ground, and the room knew it. "You claim he manipulated you, coerced you. Why not walk away?" he challenged, his voice rising in frustration. Jennifer didn't flinch. Her composure was absolute. "You think I didn't want to? Every single day I wanted to. But by the time I realized how deep it went, how intricate the web was, I was already part of it. It wasn't just one man. It was a system, a network, and I was scared of what would happen if I stepped out of line. I was scared of being crushed." The lawyer's confidence faltered, his questions losing their bite. He tried again, a desperate last attempt. "Let's talk about the voicemail played yesterday. You said Mr. Combs threatened to release videos. Did he ever actually release anything?" "No." "Then why are you assuming it was real? Why would you believe such a vague threat?" "Because I lived with him," she stated, the simple words carrying immense weight. "I knew what he had, cameras on, what rooms were wired, what conversations were recorded without consent. I saw the equipment." Gasps echoed in the gallery again, a visceral reaction to the horrifying reality she described. "You never saw these tapes?" the attorney persisted. "I didn't have to," she countered, her voice filled with a chilling certainty. "He told me he had them. And when a man like that says he's got you on tape, you believe him. You have no choice but to believe him." The attorney stepped back, visibly rattled, defeated. "No further questions," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The prosecutor returned for redirect, her face etched with a quiet admiration. "Miss Lopez, thank you. One final question. What do you want your testimony to accomplish today?" Jennifer looked at the jury, her gaze sweeping across each face, connecting with them on a profoundly human level. Her voice, once a whisper of fear, now resonated with unwavering strength. "I want the truth to matter. I want people to stop thinking that silence equals consent. And I want him to know." She turned her head, her gaze finally locking with Diddy's across the room, full of a fierce, undeniable defiance. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." The room sat motionless, transfixed. And then suddenly Diddy stood. The courtroom guards tensed, ready to intervene, but he didn't move aggressively. He just stood and stared at Jennifer across the room. Everyone waited, breathless, for him to speak, for some outburst, some final, desperate attempt at control. But he said nothing, and maybe that silence, that profound, defeated quiet, was the most telling thing he could have offered. A final, unspoken admission. The judge gavelled the session to a close. "This court is adjourned until further notice." Jennifer stepped down for the final time. Her heels echoed once more across the marble floor, but this time, they didn't sound like retreat. They sounded like liberation, like footsteps marking the end of a long, dark journey, and the beginning of a new, empowered one. Outside, the streets were packed with protesters, with cameras, with supporters. But inside, within those walls, where power had once felt impenetrable, where secrets had been carefully buried, something historic had occurred. A woman returned to the place where she was once silenced, and she made sure her voice would never be unheard again. The world outside buzzed with headlines, with hashtags, with whispers and speculation. But inside the courtroom, where truth had begun to eclipse power, the silence spoke volumes. Jennifer Lopez's final day on the stand had left an impact no legal strategy could erase. And yet, the prosecution wasn't done. The full truth, the complete dismantling of the silent empire, required one more angle, one final layer to reveal. A piece of evidence they had quietly protected, waiting for the exact moment it would matter most. The judge called the room to order, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. The prosecution approached the bench, holding a sealed envelope, starkly marked, "Classified. Confidential interview video transcript." There was no dramatic flourish, no performance, just a quiet, unshakable certainty. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, her voice steady and deliberate. "The state requests permission to play video footage from a private deposition given in 2005 by a woman who previously worked as Mr. Combs's personal assistant. She was placed under a legal gag order until 2024 due to civil settlements. Her NDA has now expired, and she has authorized the release of this statement." The judge nodded, his expression grim. "Play the footage." The screen came to life. The image was grainy, dated, betraying its age, but the voice was clear, unmistakable, and filled with a quiet, lingering trauma. A woman in her early 30s was seated in what appeared to be a legal office, clearly distressed, but composed, her voice trembling slightly, yet resolute. "My name is Alina Torres. I worked for Sean Combs between 1998 and 2003. I was his executive assistant. I handled travel, guest coordination, event lists, and sometimes things that didn't go through HR. Things that were off the books." The prosecutor turned to the jury, her voice urgent. "Please listen carefully." The video continued. Jennifer Lopez was different from the other women around him. She had her own brand, her own power, but that, paradoxically, made her more valuable to him. If she, someone so prominent, could be controlled, it proved he could control anyone. It was a test, a display of his reach. Alina paused in the video, looking off camera, as if struggling with a painful memory. "I saw messages, threats. I saw her name on lists, sometimes under special handling. I once overheard a call where Sean told someone, 'JLo's getting smart. We'll remind her who built her stage.' She didn't know how many rooms had cameras. Not all of them were obvious. I once delivered a hard drive labeled Angel Sessions that was just footage from a private party. Her included. She never saw the cameras. None of them did. He had eyes everywhere. The gallery sat in stunned, horrified silence. The weight of the testimony, coming from an insider, was too sharp to process immediately. I left in 2003 because I couldn't keep doing it, Alina continued, her voice breaking with emotion. I couldn't keep pretending these people were protected. I tried to warn her once, sent an anonymous note to her manager. A week later, I was fired and paid off to stay silent. The NDA was crushing, but I had to try. The screen went black. The courtroom remained frozen, the silence deafening. Then, slowly, painfully, all eyes shifted to Diddy. His hands were pressed together, trembling slightly, his knuckles white. He looked at no one, his gaze fixed on the floor. The air around him had changed. He wasn't untouchable anymore. He was a man cornered by his past, by his victims, by the truth finally emerging from the shadows. The prosecutor didn't speak for a moment, letting the echo of the recording settle, letting the full gravity of Alina Torres's words sink in. Your Honor, she finally said, her voice resonant. We submit this as Exhibit 126. The judge accepted it with a grim nod, his expression hardening. Then, the prosecutor continued, her voice powerful and commanding. This trial has revealed more than just illegal acts. It has exposed a systematic silencing, a coordinated machine built to control, intimidate, and erase people when they stepped out of line. Jennifer Lopez didn't just testify as a witness. She testified as a survivor. And now others are stepping forward, emboldened by the truth that she helped unleash. She paused, turning toward the gallery, her gaze sweeping over the faces of reporters, legal experts, and concerned citizens. The defense may argue that Jennifer stayed, that she benefited, that she was never forced. But we ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, how many women, how many assistants, how many voices does it take before silence is no longer a choice, but a survival mechanism, a weapon wielded against them? The judge called for a brief recess, his voice cutting through the palpable tension. Outside, the media had already erupted, headlines screaming across news feeds. Inside, it was something else entirely, an unshakable awareness that power was no longer enough to protect Diddy. Not from evidence, not from history, and certainly not from the voices that had finally found the courage to rise. Jennifer Lopez had walked into that courtroom as a witness. But by the end of the day, she had become something more powerful than a celebrity. She had become the catalyst, and the fire had only just begun to spread. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the judge returned to the bench, his face hard set with the exhaustion of overseeing a trial that had evolved from a criminal investigation into a societal turning point. The bailiff called the room back into order. There were no side conversations now, no subtle whispers among legal teams. Even the jury had stopped glancing at each other, their faces grim, their attention unwavering. Every eye was locked on the prosecution table because what was coming next had been whispered about for weeks behind closed doors, a piece of evidence hinted at, and now it was time for it to be exposed in full view, for the world to witness. The prosecutor stepped forward, this time holding a laptop linked to the court's central display system. Her tone was steady but intense, her composure absolute. Your Honor, she said, her voice resonating with finality. We have one final piece of evidence. This will serve as a turning point in the court's understanding of the relationship between Ms. Lopez and Mr. Combs, and will directly tie past misconduct to the network of manipulation currently under investigation. It is the final nail in the coffin of a carefully constructed illusion. The judge nodded gravely, his gaze fixed on the screen. Proceed. The screen came to life, flickering through lines of digital footage before stopping at a paused video file titled Private Residence, December 2007, Audio Surveillance of V number 12. The prosecutor turned to the jury, her voice low and impactful. This footage was obtained from a hidden surveillance system discovered during a recent federal raid on one of Mr. Combs's properties. It was not listed in any security documentation. The room in which this footage was captured has been referred to in other testimonies as the mirror room, a location inside a secured wing, specifically used for confidential gatherings and, as we will show, coercion. In this recording, she continued, her voice building, Mr. Combs is heard discussing a containment protocol regarding Miss Jennifer Lopez. Gasps, loud and collective, rippled across the gallery like a tidal wave. The sheer audacity, the chilling implication of the words, left everyone stunned. The video began to play. The scene was dimly lit, plush seating visible, a wall lined with mirrors reflecting the shadowy figures within. Diddy was seated with two unidentified individuals, their faces blurred on the screen for legal reasons. His voice, clear and chillingly casual, filled the room. "She's getting too nostalgic," Diddy's voice said, a dismissive tone. "Keeps mentioning 1999, keeps hinting she wants to clear the air. She's a liability." One of the blurred men responded, his voice lower, almost a murmur. "You want us to push back? Remind her of the terms." "Not yet," Diddy replied, his voice laced with chilling calculation. "Remind her who protected her career when the heat came. If she forgets, I've still got the too real. The full cut." The other asked, "All three angles?" The audio crackled faintly, a subtle distortion, then continued. "Yeah. I don't want to burn her. Not unless I have to. But if she talks that empire she built, the girl next door thing, it collapses overnight. She knows what I have." Gas burst in the room like thunderclaps, a raw, shocked explosion of sound. Even the judge couldn't hide his reaction, leaning back sharply in his seat, visibly disturbed, his face pale. Paris Jackson, seated quietly in the gallery, her hands trembling, covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling in her eyes. Members of the jury exchanged horrified looks, their faces mirroring the collective shock. Jennifer Lopez, seated just a few feet away, remained frozen, her back straight, her fists clenched tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. But she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just stared at the screen, her gaze fixed on the man who once claimed to love her, now casually threatening to destroy her life, her entire identity, as if it were nothing more than a negotiation tactic. It was a cold, brutal display of power. The screen went black, plunging the room into a profound, heavy silence. The prosecutor spoke into that silence, her voice calm, yet radiating an undeniable power. "There you have it. A direct confirmation that Mr. Combs had recorded, stored, and prepared to use footage as leverage against Jennifer Lopez. This wasn't a partnership. This wasn't protection. This was premeditated blackmail, carefully designed, carefully concealed, and carefully timed to keep her quiet, to control her, to hold her life hostage." The judge's gavel hit the bench once, then twice, the sharp sounds cutting through the stunned silence. "We'll break for deliberation on the admissibility of this video into the final phase of evidence. Court is in recess," he announced, his voice strained. But no one stood. Diddy slouched in his seat, the last strands of his confidence unraveling into sheer dread. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something fast, panicked, but Diddy didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, his eyes distant and haunted, as if he knew. This was the moment the trial pivoted from suspicion to certainty, from victim testimony to irrefutable, undeniable proof. Jennifer Lopez had carried the weight of silence for decades, a silent burden. And now, the very evidence Diddy thought would keep her controlled had become the thing that broke him. The courtroom no longer saw him as powerful. They saw him as exposed, finished. And in that moment, the empire he built on fear collapsed with a whisper louder than any scream. The final day of testimony arrived under gray skies, as if the city itself had bowed under the weight of truth that had been revealed. Outside the courthouse, reporters jostled for position, their faces tense, their voices rehearsed for the historical moment they all knew was coming. Inside, the courtroom was nearly silent, the air thick with anticipation, heavy and still. No murmurs, no coughs, no idle glances, just a collective, palpable quiet. Sean Diddy Combs sat alone at his table, flanked by attorneys who now looked less like a defense team and more like men guarding the wreckage of a fallen monument. His once celebrated swagger had evaporated, replaced by a defeated slump. He was hunched, eyes distant, as if awaiting a verdict that had already echoed far beyond the walls of justice, reverberating across the globe. Jennifer Lopez re-entered the courtroom, not to speak, but to observe, to witness the culmination of her courage. Dressed in quiet tones, she took her seat in the gallery beside her legal counsel. There was no makeup, no elaborate jewelry, no hint of a performance. She had done what she came to do. She had spoken her truth. The judge took his seat and glanced across the courtroom, his gaze sweeping over every face. He didn't waste words. His voice was firm, resonating with gravity. This court has reviewed the final audio and video footage admitted into evidence. After careful consideration, it is the determination of this bench that what has transpired here transcends a singular testimony. It is a revelation of a long-standing system built on manipulation, coercion, and image control. A system that has held individuals captive through fear. He turned to the jury box, his gaze direct and unwavering. The testimony of Miss Jennifer Lopez, corroborated by recordings, witness statements, and digital evidence, has unveiled a deliberate, calculated pattern of suppression that cannot be overlooked. A pattern designed to silence and intimidate for decades. Jennifer kept her gaze forward, steady, unblinking, absorbing every word. The judge continued, his voice echoing with profound significance. For years, power shielded those who stood above consequence, those who operated in the shadows. That era ends today. He turned back to Diddy, his final pronouncement hanging heavy in the air. Mr. Combs, you are hereby ordered to return for criminal proceedings. The evidence supports further investigation into acts of witness intimidation, digital blackmail, and obstruction of justice. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by the fevered clicking of journalists texting furiously under the benches, desperate to break the news. Diddy didn't move, his jaw clenched, but he remained silent, his empire of intimidation collapsing, not with a roar, but with the quiet, devastating surrender of a man finally cornered by his own legacy. Jennifer stood slowly, deliberately. She didn't need applause or external validation. She had given the world something far more rare than a performance. She had given it the truth. And the truth, once spoken, had spread like an unstoppable fire. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled, an ocean of faces stretching down the street. But this time, the chants weren't for gossip or spectacle. They were for justice. We believe you. Thank you, Jennifer. End the silence. Cameras turned, not toward the man once hailed as an icon, but toward the woman who once stood in his shadow and now stood tall, bathed in her own light. She walked down the courthouse steps slowly, purposefully, with no security walling her off from the people. And they welcomed her, not as a pop star or a tabloid figure, but as a symbol of what happens when courage meets the courtroom, a symbol of resilience. In the final moments, as the sun broke faintly through the clouds, painting the sky with a fragile hope, a reporter shouted, her voice cutting through the cheers, "Jennifer, do you have anything left to say?" She paused just once, then looked back toward the courthouse, a building that had once embodied her fear, now a monument to her triumph. She met the reporter's gaze, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a lifetime of unburdened truth. "I'm not his silence anymore." And with that, she disappeared into history, not as a bystander, not as a victim, but as the woman who helped bring down an empire of fear and reminded the world that no lie lasts forever when the truth is finally heard. The silence was finally broken, and the world would never be the same.